So there's a view that you might share that the physical world is determined. What I mean by that is that the physical world is dictated by certain fundamental laws of physics, such that, the previous state of the world plus these laws of physics guarantee the next state of the universe. Right. If you study Newtonian physics, you know exactly what this worldview looks like, right? So take the initial conditions, the initial state of the universe, or the way that the universe is right now, right? And then follow these laws of physics, and you should know exactly what will happen next, right? If a billiard ball, let's say billiard ball A, is traveling towards another billiard ball, let's call it billiard ball B, in a vacuum at a specific velocity v with a mass of m, then when billiard ball A hits billiard ball B with its given mass will then move at such and such a velocity, right? And you could use these Newtonian laws to calculate exactly what the velocity will be based off of the mass and based off of all the other information given, right? Okay. The only issue with knowing what comes next for us humans is that we just lack knowledge of all the initial conditions of the world, and we currently don't know everything there is to know about the laws of physics, right? We're still kind of uncovering and trying to make sense of some of these laws that seem to be governing the universe. But once we know both, we can have what might be like a God's perspective, right? We can then predict with 100% accuracy what will happen next, and after that, and after that, until the end of time, right? Um, let's set aside some of the wrinkles that quantum physics may throw in. I don't know if they actually do, but let's just assume for the sake of argument that the world is determined in the way that I just described, right? If it's true, right, which a lot of people tend to work under similar sorts of assumptions about the way the world operates, right? If true, then we as physical beings are then subject to these laws of physics, right? And shouldn't be much of a surprise, right? If you think about, just your physical health, right? If you're exposed to a virus, there's a chain reaction that leads to your sneezing and coughing and having a fever. We don't think it just like magically occurs or by chance, right? It's because we believe that the laws of physics apply to us as well, which is also why we take medication, right? These medicines have been developed in order to help us alleviate certain symptoms or illness or kill a bacterial infection that might be harming us. And we know that it'll work to a certain degree because we know that doing X will lead to Y, which will lead to Z, right? It's also why, that if I kick you in the chest within the force, you're going to fly off in some kung fu movie sort of way, right? We are physical beings. And so hence it makes sense that we are bound by the laws of physics. This is actually the very reason that you probably will not jump off a rooftop to see if you'll fly, because you know that based off of your understanding of the way gravity works, you're definitely going to fall. And given what else you know, you probably are going to hit the ground and you're going to get seriously injured, right? What does this have to do with anything? Well, let me connect the dots for you, right? You and I are bound by the laws of physics. And if these laws are deterministic in the way that I have described, then you and I are not any different than the billiard balls, right? Everything about us, from our genetics to our environment to the impact that the world has on our thoughts and behaviors and the way it shapes us and the way we, develop both physically, mentally, all these things, our personality, tendencies, right? All of this is determined. And that seems even more likely the more that we uncover some truth about the human psyche through things like neuroscience, right? What we find is that there are certain processes in the brain and in our body that send certain messages that result in the things that we might have attributed to something else now being attributed to just simply laws of physics, including things like our emotions, right? Our emotions are nothing more than a set of certain neurological, chemistry, and physiological response to certain types of stimuli. It is the kind of response might be based in part on genetics, but also might be from life experience that has kind of habituated us to respond in a certain way. Okay. What's odd here is that when it comes to holding someone morally responsible, we seem to view people in a very different way. We seem to assume that our actions, at least when we're not under the influence of certain substances or suffering from some debilitating disease or disorder, that we're actually acting on some sort of rational capacity, something that is up to us, right? But the question arises, right? How is it possible that, you know, we're being held responsible for something that is, we're presuming is up to us, if we ourselves are nothing more than a mere extension of repeated applications of the laws of physics, right? And it becomes even more puzzling when we think in the following way, right? Like, look, we would not hold billiard balls for the kind of behavior that they engage in, because we don't think it's up to them, right? Like the balls move in the way that they do because of the forces that are applied to them, right? So, like, look, if the ball is moving around and I get smacked with one of the balls and it hurts, right? I don't start yelling at the ball and saying like the ball did something wrong and there's an injustice and now I'm going to sue the ball for the harm it caused, right? That makes no sense. But we do it with other people. We do it with other people. We don't treat other people, at least in certain cases, right, in the way that they behave, when we attribute it to it being up to them, we don't treat them in this way that we do billiard balls or other objects, right? Rather, we treat them as if they are the internal, right? What do we call it? Like the initial cause, the motivator, the one that made it happen, right? We treat other people in this way. And that's the very reason that we hold each other responsible for things. That's why we sue each other. That's why we get angry and frustrated and, right, we blame other people, right? It's because we think that others are not just simply extensions of, these repeated applications of the laws of physics, right? So we are then faced with attention, right? Attention, I think we face regularly, right? We see other people, either ourselves or others, as free, as reasoning, deliberating agents that make decisions about what to do. Hence, because they are these free, agents, right? We can hold each other responsible morally, legally, or otherwise, right? Yet we also see people as nothing more than a product of, biology and the environment, laws of physics, right? Hence, they make the decisions that they do because they were molded into the kind of people that they are, right? Like this happens a lot when we, get to really know a friend, get to know a person kind of very intimately, deeply. You learn about the history, and a lot of things sort of start to make sense, right? This is what therapists do for their patients, right? Help them connect the dots, right? Oh, yeah, it's interesting that you had these sorts of experiences seem to have a certain kind of impact on you, and it makes sense why you respond in the way that you do to certain kinds of situations, right? The reason that you have certain phobias, or the reason that you do tend to react very strongly to certain kinds of perceived slights, or whatever else it might be, right? So this way of seeing people, it's reflected in how we make sense of, each other, right? We tend to try to get to know each other for this reason, because we don't think that they just end up being who they are out of nowhere. We believe that they are who they are as a product of some combination of their biology as well as their life experiences. Okay. But when we see others in this way, then it now is very confusing, right? Because it now seems as if they had no control over who they are or the decisions that they make, right? It doesn't make any sense at all, right? So the point is this: look, we are constantly living with this tension, and we're trying to figure out how it is that we're supposed to view people and hold them responsible, while at the same time also seeing them like any other physical object in the world. And we're trying to balance these two, because it seems like going off into one direction too much has certain consequences that we're not particularly happy about, right? For instance, if we went too far off into the direction of people don't have any, control over themselves, they're just a mere product of their environment and their genetics, and the laws of physics in the way that, billiard balls are, then we would have no grounds for holding anybody responsible. Our entire legal system would have to change. It wouldn't be anything about, moral or legal responsibility, but rather it would just be some pragmatic thing about, we don't want billiard balls flying in our face in the same way we don't want people's fists flying in our face, right? So, as a pragmatic concern about, just things that, people generally do not want, right? In order to fulfill majority of the people's desires, we're going to have to set laws that restrict people and have rules for how people are going to be punished. But these are pragmatic concerns. It's not because anybody did anything wrong. Like, we would have to get rid of that notion that people are doing anything wrong, anything that they can be held responsible for in any way, right? Any sort of punishment, any sort of legal justification for, incarcerating people would have to strictly be on the grounds of some pragmatic concern about, I don't know, general preference of the way that we want to structure our world, the way that, just the same way that I want a building to look or, serve a certain function or purpose, I want now the laws to serve certain functions, nothing more, right? Um, so we might not be too happy going in that direction, right? But we also might not be too happy going in the other direction and saying that people are just, free, rational entities that that should be held responsible for any decisions that they make. Because the reality is that we do tend to account when we're evaluating or judging other people. We tend to account for the fact that some people have sometimes just been dealt a bad hand. And as a result, it wasn't really, their fault that they tend to be the way that they are, right? We call these mitigating circumstances, right? Like, look, if a child has been abused incessantly since, infancy, right? And as a result, suffer from certain brain damages. And as a result, they tend to behave in certain ways that potentially harm other people, right? Like, we tend to be a lot more understanding of that person than somebody who has had every opportunity in the world to not be somebody that other people absolutely hate, right? Or engage in what we might call, antisocial behavior. And so we hold these two people along different standards for a reason, right? Because the history, to some degree, maybe it doesn't account for all of it, but it does seem to matter to some degree, right? We empathize with the people who have struggled in their lives and have not been given an opportunity to make their lives, the best that they could, to be the best version of themselves. We tend to empathize with those people a lot more than somebody who has had those opportunities, right? We tend to account for the environment and for the genetics and for whatever else might have shaped the person into the kind of person that they are, right? So, what am I saying here, right? What I'm trying to say is the following, right? You probably already hold a position, you probably lean more in one direction or the other already. And you can actually look to your own judgment of, other people, and in the way that you engage with the world generally, including non-human, inanimate objects, animals, and so on. You probably have some sort of position on this already that is actually informing your views. But if we don't talk about it out loud and we don't come to at least some points of agreement on this matter, you might find that the disagreement in the worldview might be what's shaping the different ways we approach things like, legal policies, the way that we approach social services, and how much we think that it's the responsibility of the community to provide for certain basic goods, as opposed to it being an individual responsibility, right? Like, these questions, a lot of them, I find from my conversations with others, comes down to some sort of disagreement in where you are in this spectrum of leaning more towards humans just being nothing more than, determined entities, physical entities, just like anything else, or how much weight you give to the idea that people should be treated and held responsible as free, rational agents. And most people will probably be somewhere in the middle, again, leaning more in one direction or another. But the fact that that sort of framework is working in the background and is the source of so much of our disagreement tells me that it will be important for us to actually talk about it out loud, to see exactly where the points of disagreements are, and to, share reasons for one or the other to come to at least something closer to a consensus, at least as far as we might know, something that will maybe suffice to bring about a kind of a world, or a way of navigating the world that we can at least more or less agree to, right? So I hope that this gives you at least some reason for thinking that even though we don't might not be able to settle this question, it's at least would be important for us to have this conversation much more openly and much more explicitly than we might be doing today.